Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Nabiyyina wa qudwatina Muhammad alayhi afdal as-salah wa azka taslim. Allahumma a'limna bima yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna 'ilman ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi everybody. Welcome Sunday evening to our class of Reforming the Self with Dhariyah ila Makarim Shariah, the path to virtue, the path to excellence, the path to living up to your potential, realizing your true destiny, the excellent qualities that Allah wants you to have and to perfect. We're still within the author's, okay, we got a lot of people joining up, so let me pause for just a second. Okay, everybody's in there. So we're still within Raghib Asfahani's breakdown of blessings. Okay, he had talked about the different types of blessings. Can we recount them? Can we recall what are the different categories of blessings? He says there's 5. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the chat box or unmuting yourself, whatever you want to do. Somebody throw out health, wealth, manners. Okay. Those are all part of the blessings, that's true. But he had categorized it into 5 categories. So for example, health would fall into which category? The blessings of the body. There we go. And wealth would fall into, okay, manners would fall into virtue, right? Which is in with the mind and everything. Yes, good. And then wealth would fall into something he called like external blessings, because they didn't have to do with your body or your mind or your virtue, anything that is located within your person, right? Something external to yourself. Right? That's what wealth was part of. So those were the 3 middle ones, and the 2 bookends were the afterlife, right? Easy one, the blessings of the afterlife, the highest virtue, the goal of everything that we're shooting for. And then success, blessings that have to do with success. So those are the 5 categories. First of all, the blessings of the afterlife, the blessings of virtue. Could also say the mind there, I think. The body, external blessings such as wealth, family, etc. And finally, success. And we talked about how Raghib al-Asfahani, he broke down success into more discrete parts. All right, so he talked about hidayah, which is kind of like this external instruction, direction, guidance. Then he talked about rushd, which was more of an internal direction, a response, right, to the external stimulus that's going to set you into the right orientation. Then he talked about tasdeed, which was relevant, appropriate action that will actually bring you to your goal, to what you want. And then he talked about nusra and ta'eed, which is the aid of Allah, which brings about the result. Because even with all of the 3 previous ingredients, correct external instruction, correct internal orientation, correct or appropriate action, only Allah can bring the results. Only Allah can bring the results. The causer of causes. And he had also mentioned how there are 3 stages to guidance. The first of which is distinguishing the path of good from the path of evil. The second is progress, making progress upon that path. And then the last is kind of maximizing your potential. How far can you go, right? Everybody's journey is limited and structured by the amount of resources that we have at our disposal, whether it's the number of years that we're going to live on earth, whether it's the amount of pennies or pounds in our bank accounts, whatever are the limiting factors. Each of us has an end, a ceiling, an upper limit, where as far as we can go, and that is the realization of our best selves. That is the righteousness in the third sort of level of guidance. That's Raghib Asfahani identifies. How does one practically, all these things sound very nice, right? It sounds really nice to have this clarity, guidance, success, all this other stuff. Okay. If it were so easy, wouldn't everyone be successful? What are the actual concrete, practical steps that someone can take in order to achieve success or become more successful? Not successful just in the sense of at your job or at your career, but we're talking here spiritually. We're talking here when you interact with the Quran, when you are doing the jihad work of your fraught relationships with your family. Ah, you remember. Very good. It's all based on loving and believing in what is good and beautiful. Yeah. That was the first step. That's very good. He has some additional techniques, we could say, how to attract Allah's guidance and aid and protection. One of which he says is intent listening. So often, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, so often when we're listening to somebody, we're not really hearing them, but rather we're hearing something else. We're hearing something that's maybe similar, but not exactly what we're being told. Something that happened in our experience and in our lives. Right? We managed to hijack the conversation and really make it about us. Right? It happens all the time. Someone is pouring out their heart to you about a difficult relationship that they're going through, a loss in the family. And the temptation is to make it about us. It reminds you of a loss that you experienced. It reminds you of a relationship issue that you're going through. Now, this doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? You can use your common experience to relate to somebody, to reach out to somebody, to encourage somebody, to keep the spotlight on them. But it can also go astray. It can also go haywire. If you're still stuck up within yourself and your own issues, you're not going to be able to give refuge to the other person. Hey, well, listening but not paying attention, 100%. It's like somebody comes to you and tells you about their issue with their spouse, and then you get heated and you say, yeah, that's right, and I have that, and this issue, and this is going on, and this is going on, right? The person was reaching out to you for help and for advice, and now you've kind of made it into your own thing. Or here's another thing that we do. Guilty. When we're listening and we're not quite agreeing with the conclusion or the framework that the person is coming to you with. We're thinking the whole time the other person is speaking how to respond. We've stopped listening, or we're listening but not paying attention, as was just said. We're like, okay, it's almost like we think it's a chess match. You want to win, right? Like, well, okay, they said this, so I'm going to attack from this angle and outflank them on the right side, and then, got them. In that case or that situation, you're not really doing a whole lot of intent listening, okay? If this happens every single day when it comes to our own relationships, then what's the relationship between this practice and success? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the only complete and preserved book of revelation on earth, Al-Quran. And Allah said it was tibyanan likulli shay. It clarified everything. Huda lil muttaqin. Guidance for the pious. How can we receive the instruction coming from Allah if we are treating Allah's revelation just like we're treating that conversation where we're not really listening? Allah's trying to tell us something, and we're focused on this other thing that it reminds us of, tangentially related possibly, but not really what Allah's trying to alert our attention to. Or we're plotting how to convince ourselves that that's not us in the Quran if it's talking about reproach and reprimand and telling you to stop doing something. We have all the excuses prepared for ourselves and justifications as to why I gossip, why I talk about other people, why I don't spend more in charity, why I don't do more worship. We have all the excuses already prepared. And so we treat Allah's guidance to us like a conversation in which we're not really listening. Okay. Do you see now how much of an obstacle that is to being guided, to success? We want to have success. We want to get to the afterlife. We might cry about it. Pray and cry about it. But all of those tears at the end of the day, if when we read the Quran, we're not really listening, then what are the chances of us having a moment of success, of taking that guidance to heart? There's a related issue to this, okay? Not all poor listening is arrogance, but some of it is. And so the next thing that Raghib Asfahani says, if you're looking for success, one of the practical things that you can do is to humble your heart. To humble your heart. There's a reason why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that anybody who has so much as a mustard seed of arrogance in their heart will not enter paradise. Why is arrogance so deadly compared to other things such as heedlessness, such as other forms of transgression, drinking alcohol, illicit relationships, all these sorts of things? Arrogance is more dangerous often than all of those, because arrogance stops you from submitting. Arrogance stops you from succeeding. It is a block, an obstacle, a huge locked iron door between yourself and the guidance that Allah is trying to give to you. It's like infertile soil. It's like trying to plant a seed on a rock. It doesn't matter how much fertilizer or whatever else you're going to throw at it. It's just not going to grow there. It's got nothing, no receptor sites. It's got no fertile ground literally and figuratively, to receive. It's not prepared to receive. It's not docile. It's not submissive. Ah, that's right. Yeah, very good, very good, very good example. The shaitan, at least. Yes, he refused to bow down. Why? So I'm better than him. I'm made of fire. He's made of clay. Pu. Clay stinks. Boo. Right? Childish argument if you really think about it, but arrogance will take you there. It will take you to that kind of childish conclusion, and you won't be able to get out of it. So, humbling one's heart, okay? Humbling one's heart is an essential ingredient to success. You can't take things personally, right? You can't think that if somebody has feedback for you, whether it's a person in your life, whether it is the revelation, that it's targeting you. No, it's just about this thing that you're doing that could be better, right? You have to suspect yourself. Raghib Asfahani talked about this earlier, that the intellect, when it's developed, it suspects itself. Wait a second, what are your motivations, right? The lower self inclines to what's easy, what's convenient, shies away from hardship, shies away from discipline. So you suspect yourself, you humble yourself, you assume that you could have been mistaken, that you could have been wrong. And you assume that you see yourself in the text before you're thinking about, oh my gosh, that's this person. I was talking with someone once, and they confessed to me, they said, I have this problem. I read the Quran, and every time it talks about like the sinners and the deniers and these people, I'm thinking of like individuals in my life. I was very impressed at that person's honesty, right? At least they've identified the problem. Why is it that we so easily picture other people and don't picture ourselves? What's the ways in which you are denying the truth? What are the ways in which you are preventing other people from getting their rights or taking other people's rights away? Or just not giving people their due, right? This is a humble heart. Somebody who will find fault with themselves first. Raghib al-Asfahani, next he mentions the restrictions and limits, having restrictions and limits. And he specifically says, having a sincere teacher who's going to place restrictions and limits upon you. This is so interesting compared to our modern age. What everybody's looking for, some sort of satisfaction, and the era in which we live, people think that satisfaction is to be found in liberation. Liberation means really freedom to do what one wants, license to act how one pleases. And Raghib al-Asfahani here, he's telling us something that's revolutionary and different and opposing to that, that the satisfaction and blessing and success is to be found in disciplining the self. And by pointing out that it's useful to have a sincere teacher, or maybe even essential to have a sincere teacher, he's implying something about ourselves that we just talked about. How the wise person suspects themselves, okay? They find fault with themselves. That tells us that if we're left to our own devices, we don't have any external authority supervising us, looking out for us, evaluating us, then it can become an echo chamber. It can become a positive feedback loop. It can be just, you're impressed with yourself, or you're kind of comfortable, or no one's pushing you from the outside. Now, Raghib Asfahani, he qualifies this, and he says it has to be a sincere teacher, because how many people throughout history have abused the station of a teacher? They weren't a sincere teacher, and so they end up manipulating their students, taking advantage of them, leading them astray. This is a real problem. There needs to be checks and balances. Everybody needs a sincere teacher to keep them in line, to evaluate, to give feedback. Once in a while, to reprimand, to say you shouldn't have done things like that. Next time, do it this way. According to what that person, what that teacher knows about the student. Okay? Everybody's different. Some people, they respond well to straight talk. Hey, do this, don't do that. Easy, they love it. Other people, they don't respond well to that sort of style, and so they need somebody who's going to be more gentle, give them a parable, give them something that they're going to understand, appeal to their intellect a little bit more. Everybody's a little bit different. The teacher-student relationship, ideally, if the teacher is sincere, enables that sort of advice. So having a sincere teacher is going to break you out of your echo chamber and is going to fast track your success. Because one of the possible limitations to our success is if we're just stuck in this kind of echo chamber and groupthink, and everybody's telling everybody that they're doing great, and nobody's kind of giving some feedback or evaluation for how things can be done better. Oh yeah, Shahada family, 100%. It happens all the time. Convince ourselves that we're on the right path. We're the ones that are saved. We're the ones that have it right. We're the ones that are following the true way, the true Islam, the authentic, correct version. And if there's no oversight, we've seen, without getting into details, but I think anybody who's been had a finger on the pulse of the Muslim community in the Anglosphere in the last 30, 40 years knows that, this lesson is significant. Ya salam. Ya salam. A fantastic comment about how the Prophet ﷺ tailored everyone's education to their own individual need. Yes, there were companions who were rough, who didn't understand, right, subtle intellectual speak, that they needed someone to tell you, yo, cut it out, as we would say on the East Coast of the United States, right? And there were other people who were more sensitive. They were more, maybe we could say, refined. And so the Prophet ﷺ was able to tailor the style to people's individual needs because they had that sort of familiarity among themselves. They weren't stuck behind a screen like we are in this pandemic. Inshallah, may Allah hasten the end of this pandemic so we can get back to doing things in person. And of course, also, streaming things for those who need and can't attend in person. But having the in-person relationship is extremely important, right? If I'm coming to you all on this screen, I can wear a big turban and press my white thobe and put a pen in the pocket, and I can manipulate the background. Look at mashallah, I've got my big books in the background and everything, and I can project, right, a certain image. But the more you know me on an individual real life relationship, the more you'll know, okay, yeah, well, Imam Tom, he's good at this, and this other thing he's not so good at, or I was surprised when I saw him do this, and right, all these things that let you know that I'm a human too, and I need as much evaluation and feedback as the rest of you. So this is one path to success: having a sincere teacher that is going to be able to give you limits and restrictions that are outside of yourself. That's the important thing. A neutral third party, right? This is how we expect nonprofit organizations to function, right? Why would we not expect our own spiritual life to function the same way? Imagine if, there was a big charity, a big Muslim nonprofit organization, and people wanted to know where all their money went. And they said, "Oh, we did an audit. We audited ourselves. Here's what we found." Like, wait a second, this sounds a little bit sketchy. You can't audit yourselves. You have to have an independent third party audit you. That's what Raghib Asfahani is getting at here. Everybody needs an outside audit, right? Once in a while. To correct, to steer just a little bit this way, a little bit that way. And then Raghib Asfahani, he pairs this with, okay, so a sincere teacher and an agreeable friend. Ya salam. Ya salam. Notice the distinction between the two roles, okay? A sincere teacher who's going to put restrictions on you, and an agreeable friend, right? Raghib al-Asfahani is telling us that the position of the friend, we're not policing each other, okay? That's not our role. And there's some, Muslim microclimates where there's too much policing. There is. Because at the end of the day, you've got everybody's more or less on the same level, and they're correcting according to their limited knowledge, and it's chaos. Oh, you need to have your clothes this way, and you can't do that, and you have to do this, and why didn't you say this? And they don't know the differences between, for example, we see this in the pandemic. Oh, how many people have asked me, is it permissible to pray in the masjid with social distancing? This is something the scholars talked about for centuries. It's not a problem. The strictest school when it comes to spacing and rows is the Hanbali school, and the Hanbalis would say that what we're doing with social distancing is absolutely acceptable. And they have evidences from the Sunnah. Yes, the Prophet ﷺ commanded us to stand together in a line together, but the command is a Sunnah of the prayer. It's not a rukn. It's not an essential aspect of the prayer, such that if it's broken, then the prayer is invalid, or your rak'ah is invalid, or anything. Nobody said this before, right? But if you have a sort of ecosphere or an ecosystem within a Muslim community where everybody is kind of at the same level and everybody is policing each other without a teacher, a sincere teacher, who's the authority to kind of say, listen, don't worry about that. Worry about this instead. Everybody's just going to be policing each other, and nobody has any true authority. And so what we have is chaos. So Raghib al-Asfahani, he goes out of his way to say that the friend, the agreeable friend, right? Now, obviously, he doesn't mean like agreeable to everything, but what we're saying is that friendship should be built upon commonality upon good. At-ta'awanu 'ala al-birri wat-taqwa, right? Coming together on good things. And support. Aywa, that's a good word to, yeah. Supporting each other. If you don't think one thing that somebody else is doing is right, you don't have to support them with that, or you don't have to support them on that. But if it's an issue of knowledge, then you leave that up to somebody who has knowledge to address that. You support them with what you know is good, and they support you with what they know is good, and everybody is building positivity, and everybody's building good vibes, and we're leaving the things that aren't even our job, we're leaving them to people who are more knowledgeable, right? The role of the friend and the role of the teacher are two different ones. That's what Raghib al-Asfahani is trying to imply here. Then he says another key aspect of success. And okay, so I should back up. He's putting this within success. Yeah, Muslim is mirror of his brother. He's putting all of this in the part on success, the chapter of success, because if you have an agreeable friend, agreeable on what is good and righteous, it's going to motivate you. It's going to motivate you. You guys are, when you sit down, you can be like, you know what? I was really thinking about so-and-so, and they're really having a hard time. What do you think we can do to kind of cheer them up or help them out? Or, I was noticing that in the masjid, we don't have this, and I think it would be a really good idea. What do you say we go to the imam? Or we really think that we need, it would be good to have a class or a lesson or a seminar on this topic. Why don't we go together and we try to see if we can do this or learn this thing together? That's the type of agreeable friendship that produces a lot of success. Each one is encouraging the other, supporting each other. And so the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? That unit of friendship, and if it's on a community level, that entire community is worth much more and will achieve much more success than just each individual kind of trying to slog their way through Arabic or whatever else they're trying to slog their way through. Then Raghib al-Asfahani, he mentions sufficient wealth. A key ingredient to success is sufficient wealth, and then he qualifies, he says, neither so much that the excess occupies him and distracts him, nor so little that he's worried about his provision or he has to spend an inordinate amount of time seeking his provision, right? There's a sweet spot. Enough provision so that you can keep your eyes on the prize. Enough provision so that you can keep going through this path of virtue, right? If you have less than what you need, all of your life, we talked about the hierarchy of needs. All of your life becomes imaratul ard. We talked about the 3 levels of purpose. All of your life becomes trying to just gain your livelihood, trying to just barely hang on with you and your dependents because that's your responsibility. But if you have too much, then it's going to be distracting. You're going to get lost in it. It's going to make you lazy and heedless. The Prophet ﷺ warned us about how too much food, too much sleep, too much conversation can turn us into lazy people who don't pursue what's good. So there's a sweet spot. There's a sweet spot of efficiency that keeps you pushing yourself towards success. It frees you up to do a little bit, Quran, Arabic, this, that, the other. Yet you're still secure in what you need. And then finally, and we'll end with this because we're getting close to the time. Family, sufficient, just like there was sufficient wealth, he says sufficient family and sufficient honor. These are referring back to the external blessing. They help with success. Why? Because sufficient family and sufficient honor keeps someone away from foolishness. He says it just like that. Why? Because we said before that your family is your primary network, right? They're looking out for you. Both when it comes to opportunities, hey, my cousin's got this job and can you put in a good word for me and I can do this or come over and do that, right? In that sort of networking of opportunities, but also in accountability, right? It happens. So-and-so is not acting right. We've got to find out how to solve the situation. So-and-so is arguing with their wife again. They need some arbitration. They need some sort of help. right? If you have sufficient family, it's going to keep you from foolishness. We have the stereotypes of like the father figure saying, you know, get a job and start to get serious and things like this, right? Well, that's kind of a little bit what we're talking about. Somebody who doesn't have any accountability, then they're liable. They're liable to go out and commit foolishness. They don't care. Nobody's watching out for them. This is an epidemic in the United States, especially in the inner cities, where we have families that are completely broken and torn apart. I think now between 40 and 45% of children are born out of wedlock. SubhanAllah. And many of them grow up in households with one parent at the most, if not less than that. If you don't have anybody setting expectations as to what's appropriate and what's inappropriate behavior, foolishness is going to happen. Sufficient family and sufficient honor will turn someone away from living life in the fast lane, living an ostentatious life, chasing the money. It's no coincidence that we see a parallel, right? I hope you're not privy to what goes on in hip-hop videos, but if you are, you don't need a lot of concrete observational skills to know what goes on, right? The ostentatious displays of wealth in cash, in cars, in houses, in everything, toys, whatever. And the culture of having no accountability, no father figure, no parent figure to set expectations for you. It's not a coincidence these things trend together, right? And we have a music industry and popular culture that glorify this type of lifestyle. That's what living is. Living the good life, living life in the fast lane. The stronger the family is, the more it keeps people away from that foolishness. The weaker the family is, the more every individual is prey and vulnerable to these messages that society is sending, that media is sending, that this is the good life. This is what success means, and so on and so forth. Having sufficient family and honor also keeps somebody's opinion of themselves in check. It's going to stop or at least temper arrogance. Okay? Arrogance and self-aggrandizement. If you're one of 5, 6, 7 children, right? Then you know that, I don't want to say that you're not special, but you don't have any delusion that you're the best thing since sliced bread, right? That you're just like the coolest thing going. In other scenarios, you can fall prey to this sort of thinking. If you have insufficient family around you, setting boundaries, setting expectations, showing you that there's a lot of useful ways to be, there's a lot of useful roles to fulfill and to play, and that everybody's in this together and actually complementing each other, and it's not like this competition. Yes, well said. No limits, no boundaries, but that has a direct correlation to also low to no morals and values. Yes, of course. There's no direction, then your morals and values are going to be what's on MTV or what's on BET or what's on whatever's being rapped about in pop music or sung about in pop music. That's what's going to be your morals. That's just what it is. I mean, it's an empty glass. It's got to be filled with something. If it's not the expectations of your family, it's going to be the expectations of media. Oh, don't get me going on body image, on other, yeah, that's a can of worms. We could talk about that all night. And finally, sufficient family and sufficient honor will give people a strong aspiration, will keep someone from loving the dunya too much, and will keep someone from delaying unnecessarily their progress or their journey on this road to becoming a virtuous person. when you have good quality people in your life, nourishing relationships, nourishing family relationships, you get inspired. You have that one uncle or that one cousin, it's like, man, I love this person. Every single time I'm with them, I just want to be like them. They're so serene and they're so peaceful, and I love how they've gone about their life. That inspires you to think about your own situation and to try to achieve something similar. If you don't have that, then you've, similar to what we've said before, you have no aspiration. There are no expectations put on you. There's no models or guides to follow. And so, as we've said, something's going to fill the glass, whether it's media, whether it's what your friends are doing, you're going to get it off the street. So all of these things are very, very practical nuts and bolts steps to achieve success. Okay. If we're wondering why we're not getting results, we have action, we have the Quran, and we're not getting the result that we want, Raghib Asfahani, he's got a couple ideas for some quick techniques that you can implement to try to maximize or further optimize your success. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Any questions before we depart for the evening? Yeah. Okay. Sounds like that's it. Everybody have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.